For those people unfamiliar with my voice, my name is Peter. Some of the things I want to talk about now is what do we do to be able to manage the change in our businesses and the things that happen. How to manage the emotions, the roller coaster that might go in your mind perhaps as you're starting to run your business. And if you knew that's the way it was supposed to be, maybe you could figure it out and work it and handle it better. So it's always kind of like you have to learn the rules. And if you learn the rules, you can play it better. When I was a high school kid, I wrestled. And I'll tell you, wrestling, the rounds in wrestling, the longest 3 minutes in your life is doing like 3 minutes of wrestling or boxing and stuff like that. But for me, it was wrestling. I'll never forget one of my first matches. I actually pinned myself, which was really ridiculous, especially if you're previewing this. Here I am, right, in my stretchy tie, getting a little helmet on, protect your ears, sitting there doing all these things. And I was actually pretty athletic, so I thought I could probably do pretty well with wrestling. But because I didn't know the rules, is that I had a guy somewhere around his ankles. And as I was pushing down on something, I was actually pinning my own shoulders. There's no reason why this guy should have won. But because I didn't know the rules, I'm pushing against him, pinning myself. So he's on my ankles. I'm pinning myself. I see the ref hit the mat. 1, 2, 3, you're out of there. And I got really mad, and I started throwing my headgear around, saying, how in the world can you pin me? It was like a tournament kind of thing, and I wanted our team to win all that sort of stuff, and here I go pin myself. So why did that happen? Well, afterwards, Coach kind of wrestled me down. He said, Peter, you're making yourself look like a knucklehead. I know you're emotional about this. You really wanted to work, but when you push against the mat and you put your own shoulders against the mat, and the guy counts 1, 2, 3, you pinned yourself. So it was all really because I didn't understand the rules. So I learned after that, you know what? If I don't learn the rules, I'm probably going to make myself a little goofy. Well, if you're going to do prospecting, if you're planning on building a business, if you're going to step out, if you're going to do anything that could potentially be great, the things that other people do that are great, you're stepping into an arena that I liken, if you will, to an emotional roller coaster sometimes. When you jump in or you step on, well, you better be prepared for the ups and the downs. And if you're going to let your emotions swing up and down with everything that happened, oh my gosh, you're going to get worn out. So if you want to step on the emotional roller coaster, you can. But I say, walk around the roller coaster. Don't step on. If you're emotionally charged, if you're somewhat competitive, you want it to work. You're not just doing this for play. You're doing this for a reason. Maybe you've invested some of your time, your money, whatever. Any of those things, watch out for that emotional roller coaster. So now that at least I've described an emotional roller coaster, and that sometimes you step on it and sometimes you don't, that in itself might be one of the most important lessons you ever hear, but you certainly got some value for that. And that's something that I could always remember that can symbolize in my mind what's happening with some of my emotion. If I can stay away from the emotional roller coaster sometimes, then I can manage the situation better. That's one thing that I would like to talk about, those little emotional roller coasters. And I share some things again about, how goofy I am sometimes. Well, there's one recently that we've been using that really helps people understand how things work. So again, the rules. And that is in changing gears or learning something new, which we can all call changing gears. When we talk about change and we talk about people doing different things and switching gears in reference to learning something new, I'm going to use an example of a change like a chain on a bicycle. When you're managing change, it comes in several forms, and here's some of the most common. I noticed that when I was changing the gears on the 3-speeder, which was like really cool, there was a temporary clinkety-clank in between first and second or second and third gear. And it almost sounded as if it was broken. When I was pedaling in first gear, it was kind of going cool. And then when you go to change, you hear that little temporary clankety-clank, unless, of course, you get it stuck in between gears, and then you hear clankety-clank for a lot. And sometimes that you hear the clankety-clank is actually necessary. It's expected. Now, that's one way of managing change. It's like the gears on a bicycle. And many times with a car, some things happen automatically. Then when you manage change, like changing gears, you push in the clutch. And when you push in the clutch, you have that certain portion where it continues to roll, and no one really notices it, especially when you do it smoothly. The car still keeps going. No one else really knows that you're managing unless you're kind of awkward with the thing. But there's two ways of managing change. One example, again, is like the bicycle, and then one, of course, is like that car where you're pushing in neutral. And then the thing that I would ask you is when you're doing anything else, which kind of change should you anticipate? And if you knew it was coming that way, it wouldn't mess you up. And when I say mess you up, I'm talking about like that emotional roller coaster, those ups and those downs, that mental drama that we all have a tendency of playing sometimes, all of that stuff. You have to ask yourself, when we do something different, Is it going to be like the kind on a car where you push on the clutch and you don't really see anything happening? The engine kind of like temporarily kind of goes okay, but it still rolls? Or is it going to be more like the one on the bicycle? That's going to go clankety-clank. And if it's the one on the clankety-clank one, then you kind of have to manage the clankety-clank. How long should you be there? Should you expect it? And when it's happening, are you doing it right or are you doing it wrong? You start to think about that stuff, and in reference, for instance, you might start to use that as an example of biggest challenge, managing change. And anytime you have to manage change, you have to handle the clankety-clank. Even the guys that know what they're doing, sometimes when they're switching gears, they have to learn how to deal with the management of the clankety-clank. If you go for the clankety-clank for any period of time that's too long, and too long for you would mean like you start to get frustrated, pick up the phone and call me, because you shouldn't be stuck in gear for that time. But I got to tell you straight ahead, you got to hear the clankety-clank if you're going to be making the measurable changes. So we'd be able to take those things, and how you manage those things would certainly be leadership skills and qualities that are going to attract more people. But if you hear about this stuff, these are the rules and these are some of the ways that it works. So I'm going to conclude by just kind of saying, hey, listen, how you manage change is very important. And how you teach people how to manage change is probably one of the most important things you'll ever learn. Even more so than learning more about your product and service, even more than learning more about your compensation plan, even more than learning more about your company, even learning more about how your website works, all that sort of stuff. How you teach people how to manage change